What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Kamen Build, episode 39. This episode is called The Unstoppable Genius, and the episode overall was really good. It gives us a little bit more background on why Utsumi decided to side with Vexento rather than staying with Sento and the others. The big reason that we actually learn has to do with Gintaku, which makes a lot of sense, and we'll get into that in this episode. So what I want to start off with is talking about where the episode continues from, because obviously, like both episodes, this one continues right where the previous one ended, where Mad Rogue has been introduced, and what happens is that he ends up fighting Rogue, and he manages to do several different attacks against him. One thing that we do see him do is summon wings, which allows him to fly and do these major finishing attacks in the air, which is very cool. So he has wings similar to how Gintaku had it with Night Rogue, if you remember, when he was in that form. So it's a pretty interesting concept overall, the fact that that is the case, of course. And what does end up happening is that he uses those wings to do attacks against Gintaku, and he manages to dish out some serious damage to the point where eventually Ryoga ends up protecting Gintaku from being completely beaten up. And then at one point what happens is that when he's about to be destroyed by Mad Rogue, when both of them are really, suddenly Grease arrives and he actually teleports them out. So he manages to save both their lives and gets them to safety. Now what does end up happening from here is that we end up learning more about Mad Rogue's reason for turning to the side of evil, which has to do with the fact that as long as he can further his scientific genius, he doesn't care who he sides with. And that has something, and that more so has to do with a change that came into his mindset when an event happened earlier in the season, and we'll get into that in this episode. But from here, what we do end up seeing is that back at the base, everyone's trying to figure out what they need to do. For starters, they're trying to figure out the reasoning behind behind Vexento's reasoning for wanting to take over the Earth and take complete control over it specifically. And Ryoga keeps on having these really dumb answers, at least in their theories, at least in their minds, which is true. And at the same time, he also ends up at one point having a flashback, similar to what he had last time, having to do with his memories associated with Vexento. Thing is, he still has some vague memories in his mindset. Even though Vexento managed to gain back his DNA, his memories still exist within him somehow. So it doesn't mean that Vexento's DNA is completely gone, although we don't really know. But it is an interesting point because he has a flashback last episode which showed Evolt's dark hole form on Mars, but then this time he sees another image of the destruction of Mars with the Pandora's Tower. So it's an interesting point to keep in mind, and this does mean that something is going on in him. And so he eventually decides to leave their base and goes to just some forest area and just sits there and just doesn't do much. But then in the meantime, what we do end up seeing is that the others have to deal with other things that are occurring. For starters, we do end up seeing at one point that Gintaku wakes up after being very badly hurt, and he remembers the fact that it's his fault that Utsumi turned evil, because Utsumi had a certain mindset, and he was going to be a good person, but what happened was that if you remember, Gintaku ended up shooting him into a river several episodes ago, back when, I'm talking very, very early into the season, when Utsumi first pretended to be Night Rogue, that one episode where he pretended so that everyone thought it wasn't Gintaku, so that so that the people of Totoro didn't believe that he was this evil figure. And so the thing is that when he shot him that one episode, that really triggered him in the senses of making him turn to this other mindset and making him lose himself in a way. And it's pretty crazy to think that did happen, but it totally did. And at the same time, he blames himself for that. He blames himself for what happened to Katsuragi, and what's just occurred regarding weaponry, the rider system, and all that kind of stuff, and how it was used. And just in general, it's an interesting point because Gintaku wants to protect the world, he wants to protect the country, he wants to do right by the people that he did wrong. He screwed up, and he wants to fix the things that he made a mistake originally with. Now, what we do end up seeing as well when it comes to Ryoga is that he actually gets confronted by Kazumi. And the thing is that Kazumi actually ends up fighting with him, and they try to increase their hazard levels by doing battle. Now, in the meantime, what we do end up seeing as well is that Katsuragi ends up taking the incomplete final bottle that he was working on, that he tried to use with the build driver in the previous episode, to purify it this time. So he tries to purify that bottle, and he manages to create a bottle which he refers to as the Genius Bottle. Now, keep in mind, the name comes from Katsuragi, having to do with his arrogance and his egotistic personality of considering himself this almighty genius. So that's why it's called the Genius Bottle. It has nothing to do with anything else other than that. But yes, it's a different look, and it's a cool bottle. It's very big, and it's supposed to channel the energies of all 60 bottles. It's supposed to channel the essences of all 60 bottles at once into this new form that he takes on, that we see at the end of this episode. So as far as things go otherwise, what we do end up seeing is that eventually we see Mad Rogue attacking Saito. There is a point, by the way, where we do end up seeing Utsumi talking to Ivalto about his plans and about the rider systems. And one thing that is mentioned is the fact that Ivalto doesn't want any of the riders that are alive to be killed. He wants them to be brought to him because they're still useful. So that's an interesting point. I'm not really sure what that really means. Does that mean that they'll be used as weapons, or does that mean that maybe he'll do something else with them? Unclear as of now what that really implies, but I'm very interested to see what that could lead to in the future. And again, we'll have to wait and see to know more about how that whole thing will work out, but definitely gets me interested. So anyway, what does end up happening is that Utsumi attacks with some hard guardians, Saito. It's a location that they've been to before also, which is interesting. And what we do end up seeing is that we see Great Crossy Dragon as well as Grease going up against these hard guardians as well as Utsumi. At one point, what does end up happening is that Katsuragi arrives at the scene. He transforms into Rabbit mode, and he begins to do battle against the hard guardians, which he manages to take out fairly easily. Then he gets into a fight with Utsumi, and the thing is that Utsumi wants to actually side with Katsuragi. He wants to work with him to improve his scientific mindset and do things that will enhance science. Because again, they're both very much so focused on science. The big difference is that Utsumi has a darker side to him as opposed to Katsuragi, where Katsuragi is a little bit more unclear. Like, he's not straight up evil, but he's still not necessarily the most he wants to do good where things turned out bad, but at the same time, he struggles with the aspect of friendship. That's the part that's really hard for him. When it comes to believing in his friends, that's not something he does. In fact, that's a point that's mentioned with Mizora, because what happens is that Mizora brings up the idea of trusting in Ryoga, because originally Katsuragi wants to actually destroy Ryoga, because Ryoga, he still believes, has the DNA of Yveltal. Now, is that true? What we thought is no. But at the same time, the memories do give you some suspicion that maybe there's something there still. It's unclear, but what is important to remember is the fact that, he doesn't feel like he can just trust someone even if they were friends with him as Sento. And this is a hard thing for him. Now, at one point, what does end up happening is that he actually uses the genius. He tries to, build up and use the genius bottle. Like, he tries to activate it. Doesn't work. Right away when he presses it, it doesn't work, and he's surprised because he knows that the design is perfect. But the thing is that he doesn't have the mindset that Sento had to really unleash its true power. And so what happens is that Mad Rogue ends up going in. He does his Evoltech finish, which is the flying kick finish that he has to swoop in and attack Katsuragi. And what does end up happening is that he begins to realize his connection to Ryoga, who Ryoga actually does defend Katsuragi at one point. As Cross-Sea Dragon, as Great Cross-Sea Dragon, he actually defends him in combat as Mad Rogue tries to get in their way. And the thing is that this begins to make it clear to him that maybe he can trust him. And he suddenly has this moment where inside his mind, Katsuragi and Sento see each other, and what happens is that Katsuragi asks Sento, you still believe in your friends and trust in them, so show me what you've built and let's get started here. And so what happens is that they suddenly shake hands. I believe it was. I believe it said that they shake hands or they do something together. And what happens is that suddenly Sento he regains his memory of Sento and he becomes Sento. And at that point, with his, regained memories and strength that he has, he transforms into the genius form, which is the final form for Kamen Rider build. Pretty much from there, the episode ends, because we don't actually get to see any combat of this form. Very typical, as we've seen several times over, when they introduce a new rider, when they introduce a new form. Very standard for them to just kind of quickly show it, and then not do anything until the next episode, because the next episode we'll finally get to see how he actually does in battle, which is great. Now, as far as things go for the next episode, what I know so far, next episode is going to also introduce the power-up form for Grease. The power-up form, unfortunately, is not like something that's very different visually. The main difference is that he has two of his weapon. So if you notice, like the weapons that he have on his arms, normally he only has one of them. In this case, he's going to have two. So that's fine, but that's really not much of a change. It's more of like a power up, which is, I guess it's okay. It's just, it would have been nice if they actually gave him a new form, because Ryoga has so many forms, Sento has so many forms. Rogue has had two forms technically, because there was Night Rogue and then there was Rogue, and then we have Mad Rogue, we have Yveltal, which has had 4 forms or something like that. I mean, and then if you include Bloodstalk, that's another one. So, the fact that there isn't another form for Grease seems a bit silly, other than the fact that there's a power-up. I mean, the power-up is fine. It's just like, yeah, let's just give him an additional weapon. Like, you couldn't have given him something different visually other than just a power-up weapon, I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying, I feel like they could have done more with that, but I guess at this point it's so late into the season that they just didn't want to go crazy with it. Still, That is happening. What we do also see is the next episode is going to bring back two of the prime ministers, the prime minister from Hokuto and the prime minister from Saito will be somehow revived, I guess. It's not clear, but we do get to see them there. It could be that maybe Ivalto is taking the form of them, like, you know, how he's taking the disguise of Suichi. Like, maybe that's what's happening there. Again, not clear, because you have to wonder how that could happen, but you never know. The Hokuto one, I forget if she actually was, like, killed or not. I know that the Saito one was, but we do actually see in certain images that, like, he's also being brought back. As far as whether or not the Toto Prime Minister is gonna be returned, I don't think so. I think he's pretty much done for, and they're not looking to bring him back, even though that could really lead to some psychological warfare with Gintaku's mind and make him, like, really upset just to see him, especially if he has to fight his father. Like, gosh, that'd be crazy. Again, hard to say for a fact right now, but it is going to be an interesting thing to see overall. And just in general, I'm looking forward to seeing the Genius form in battle. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy 1, and goodbye, guys.